Welcome, hi, to another video. If you've watched my video, if you're a subscriber, and if you're not, why not, just click the thing below, and then you can see all of my videos. If you've watched any of the past ones, you'll know that I think it was 2 or 3 videos ago, I did my last gear video. Lots of you came back and said, oh no, don't make this the last one. So when I said it was going to be my last one, that's probably not quite true, but I am going to do a lot less gear videos than the last 2 videos I think I've done. The last one was certainly all about a behind the scenes at a wedding. A little bit of talking about gear, but mainly about the actual photography itself. And that's what I intend to do for the future. I'll explain more about that in a second. But for today, I want to talk about the Nikon D850. And this is not an in-depth review. It's not anything technical. It's just my normal sort of waffle about a particular camera. And of course the D850 is Nikon's best ever small body DSLR. And I had one back in, I can't remember exactly, I think it was 2021, something like that, which I'd used. I probably only used it at about 5 or 6 weddings. Anyway, I got another one last week, and the reason for getting that is my wedding gear. My wedding gear is my Z6 III with 50mm 1.4 Z mount lens on. I absolutely love that combination. That lens with the Z6 III, it does give really lovely photos. If you know anything about me, it's about character. It's not about having the sharpest lens in the box, it's about having character. Photos that look great without zooming in 100%. I've also got the D750. No, I haven't. I've got the D780, sorry. And the reason I'm using those two at weddings is the D780, it's good enough for weddings. There is nothing it doesn't do at a wedding that I really want a camera to do. The autofocus is good enough. I only use auto area, and I let the camera decide what to focus on. If it's, if it's the dance at the end of the night, I can just hold that up and click. It'll focus on someone. And if it's just a bunch of people, I'm really not too fussed who it focuses on, but it will focus. If it's the bride walking down the aisle, I'll go to D9 and just track them coming up and I know it works. It's not the best camera for photographing birds in flight or at the Olympics, but for weddings it's good enough. And 24 megapixels, so the files aren't too big. The images are gorgeous. Possibly slightly better than the Z6 III. I've actually just sold the Z6 II because I haven't used that since the day I got the Z6 III and the ZF, so it seemed a bit pointless keeping it. But the colours and the look of the photos for the Z6 III, sorry, the Z6 II and the D780 are very similar, and I just love them. The Z6 III, I don't dislike it, and there's lots of people out there who've said the Z6 III hasn't got such good dynamic range and blah blah blah. I haven't seen anything like that, and certainly with the 1.4 lens in, I'm happy to use that as my main camera at a wedding. 60% of the photos will be with that camera lens combination. So the D780, I can use all my f-mount lenses, all my 1.4 primes, which I love, again because they give me exactly the look and the character that I'm looking for, and combined with the D780 I don't need the FTZ adapter. It's very simple just to change lenses if I need to. So I end up shooting the weddings with the 51.4 on the Z6 III, basically don't change that. 780 will have L24 on for part of the day, an 85 1.4 on for other parts of the day, maybe even a few with my 105 f2 there, just doing some of the close-up sort of portrait shots of the couple. Sorry, my screen's gone blank, I'm not sure why. Let me try that again. Right, because that's an example, this is an example of my portrait photography, which I'm going to mention any second. So that's my wedding gear. For my own personal use, well, I've got my Leica M10, I've got a couple of lenses for that. I've got the ZF, which I've got an adapter that I can put the Leica lenses on the ZF, that works brilliantly. Obviously I can put all the f-mount lenses on there with the FTZ adapter. So for my own use, I've got, you know, those two cameras are pretty much what I use for my use. The reason I got the D850, I'm decided this year that I'm going to do a lot more portrait type photography. This is some of the stuff I did before I got so busy with weddings, which has been for probably 5 years. I've been really busy with weddings, apart from obviously the COVID years where you couldn't do anything anyway, so I was as busy as I could be. And in fact, some of these were done during COVID because we could go out into the woods and do some portrait shoots and couple shoots, even though we had some sort of lockdown restrictions in place. So some of them were done during that time. A few boudoir shots as well. And I want to do more of that this year. I'm probably slightly down on weddings for 2025. I think I've got 27 booked as of today, middle of January. I think probably this time last year I had maybe sort of 32, 33. So a little bit down. And the problem with this year is they're all bunched in July and August. I think I've got 13 weddings in July and August. So it's gone absolutely crazy for those 2 months. So the rest of the year, I'm not so busy as I have been in previous years. And I want to do some more creative portrait work. And I thought, let's get a different camera. Rather than using my 2 wedding cameras or one of either of them, I have a separate camera. So I've got my wedding gear, got my portrait gear, and I've got my gear. So decided the D850, and I got this D850 from our camera shop here in the UK. It was used, I think done 18,000 shots, and claimed to be in not new condition, but in very good condition. As I mentioned, I've had a D850 before, and the problem I had with it at weddings was if you use it in low light, then the D780 is the right tool to use. The high noise, the high ISO noise on a D780 image is just so much better than a D850. The D850 above about 6,000 ISO, you're starting to really notice the noise. 780, 25,000. Providing you don't do too much playing around with the shadows and the exposure, you've only got to hit the noise. I've got a preset in Lightroom, just hit that and that applies some noise reduction, and it's usable in 2 seconds. It's not as good as if it was shot at 5,000 ISO, of course, but for those parts of the day where you've got no choice, the D780 is definitely the tool for the job. And that's one of the reasons I didn't use the D850 for weddings. Also, the 45 megapixel, 45 megapixel photos create about a 45 megabyte file compared to the 25 from a 24 megapixel camera. Yes, you can reduce the raw files from full size down to medium or even small. So medium ones would be about a 25 megapixel photo, which does reduce the megabytes down to about 24, 25. And when you're taking 1,000 pictures in a day, this does really start to make a difference. But what it also does is it reduces the quality of the image from 12-bit to 10-bit. And one day it just struck me that, hold on, I can take a 24 megapixel photo with a 780, which is 12-bit, or I can take a 24 megapixel photo with a D850, which is only 10-bit. Why would I have potentially technically it's possibly very difficult to see, but potentially not such a good image from a camera as the D780. So I didn't keep the D850. I didn't find the focusing that much better. As I say, weddings aren't that demanding, so I didn't need some of the aspects that the D850 gave me. Anyway, a couple of weeks ago, I thought, well, I want a separate camera. Let's go for the D850. 45 megapixels on a portrait shoot isn't going to matter, because I'm only doing 100, 150 photos tops anyway. I'll have a nice 45 megapixel photo. If I want to do some cropping, I can. If I want to print it huge, I can. It's probably, the best. So anyway, it arrived, and problem number one, the camera had been dropped. It had been dropped on that corner, the battery compartment, right on that corner, and it meant when you went to take the battery out, instead of just popping out like that, you almost had to get a pair of pliers and try and get hold of it and pull the thing out. It was so tight in there, and that wasn't mentioned by the shop that sold it, so that's one thing. Anyway, I thought, well, let's do some checks. Not particularly scientific or technical, but let's just do some rough and ready checks against the D780 in terms of image quality and focusing, just to remind myself where the D850 sat compared to the D780. And this is a bit of a surprise, and if you've got a D850, I'm not knocking your D850 by any means. There are some things where it's definitely going to be better than a D780. But for portraits, which is what I got this for, I stuck the 105 f2D lens on both cameras, took exactly the same shot. I took on the D850, I shot it at 45 megapixels and then went to medium raw file, so I shot at 25 megapixels. I also did the same thing, I put the same lens on the Z6 III. So I did this with the 105 f2, the 85 1.4, and my 58, my favourite ever lens, 58 1.4 as well. I did the same shots outside, and then I came inside and I did the similar sort of shots. I'm not going to run through all the shots and bother showing you, so sorry, you're just going to have to take my word for this. But first thing I noticed was that the D850 images looked just a tiny bit washed out compared to the D780, and even more washed out compared to the Z6 III. I don't know if I've changed the setting on the Z6 III, but for this test, I think the Z6 III photos were every bit as good as the D780. I'm not going to say they were better, I'm not going to say they were worse. I couldn't separate them when I was looking in Lightroom in terms of the colours, the shadows, the highlights, that kind of thing. When I zoomed in, let's just talk about the 780 and the Z6 III. When I zoomed in to 100%, if anything, the Z6 III is a tiny bit sharper. We're splitting hairs, tiny bit sharper. Then I compared the 780 to the D850 images, and compared to the 45 megapixel image, zoomed in 100%, and now obviously there's a difference in the amount that Lightroom zooms in when you do 100%, but the 780 was sharper. I'll explain why in a second. Sharper with more contrast, and zoomed in 100% just looked better. The 25 megapixel image from the D850 was even worse. That was decidedly soft, definitely. If you didn't zoom in 100%, it just looked much the same as the 45 megapixel one. It looked just a tiny bit washed out. Now, of course, you can just move the saturation slider, just a tiny bit, and it would probably be exactly the same as the D780 image. But straight out of camera as a raw file, not as good as a 780. I know from previous experience that if I end up shooting any shots when it's really dark and I'm up to fairly high ISOs, I'm going to suffer. It's going to have much more noise than a 780. So that was a little bit of a disappointment. Now, the reason this happens, I believe, is that if you go and you do some research as to what lenses are able to resolve 45 megapixels, you will find a list of lenses from Nikon that say this lens can resolve up to 24 megapixels. There's some that say up to 35, 36 megapixels. So it would be fine on a D800 or a D810. There's, of prime lenses, I think it's only the 24 1.4 is able to resolve 45 megapixels. Don't quote me on that, but I know it's a very small number. I know, for instance, the 58 1.4, my favourite ever lens, is only any good at 24 megapixels. If you put it on a D850, it is not able to provide the information, the light information that 45 megapixels requires. And therefore, and I've mentioned this in a previous video, you will end up with less sharp images from a 45 megapixel camera than you will from a 12 megapixel D700, sorry. And likewise with a 24 megapixel D780 or a Z6 III. So if I use the D850 for portraits, I would have to get another lens. In fact, I'd have to get at least two. I really want an 85 and a 58 or a 50 or something like that to do portraits. Maybe even I think actually the 105 1.4 is it the ED? It's anyway. Nikon's lens, I mean, it's about 1200 quid second hand. That I think is able to, but that's 105, and if I'm doing portrait shoots in some fairly small spaces, which I know that I'm going to end up doing, 105 is probably going to be a bit too long. Probably 85 is best. I don't make one. I'm not sure if you can use a Zeiss lens that would work with a D850. So that whole thing was a problem. Then we went on to focus, and kind of for fun, because focus for portraits isn't too important. Sorry, fast focus isn't too important. Accurate focus is vitally important. So I checked both of those aspects, accuracy and speed. And I did the speed by just setting up, I've got a mannequin, a tailor's dummy with a head on and eyes and that sort of, and I've actually filled in the eyes so that the camera thinks they are eyes. And I started out with the Z6 III just to see what the most up-to-date kind of benchmark is. And using that, just using 3D tracking, I could sort of, I don't know, what was I, 10 meters back. I walked through the kitchen and into the utility room, stood there, 3D tracking, put it on the face, started walking, click, 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 got about 8 or 10 pictures, getting closer and closer and closer, and every single one perfectly in focus, absolutely nailed it. As soon as I got about halfway, so I guess about 5 meters away, it switched from face detect to eye autofocus, and it just stayed, even though I was moving the camera as I'm walking, it stayed nailed on the eye, perfect. Then I did the D780, and what I would use for that sort of shot is, as I mentioned earlier, the D9 area. So I put that on, did the same sort of test, walked forward, and if I got 10 shots, probably 7 or 8 were bang on focus. 2 or 3 not way off focus, but didn't quite nail it. If I use auto area, which, as I say, I do use on the 780, that was much worse. That was probably down to 4 or 5 out of 10, so it wasn't as good. 3D tracking, I didn't even bother. I know the 3D tracking on the 780 isn't fantastic, so I didn't even bother trying it. Go to the D850, and 3D tracking should be pretty good on that, so I did try that. Put the camera in 3D tracking, put it on the face, started walking forward, click, 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 10 shots or so. There was bloody disaster, to be honest. The tracking box started for about 2 shots, stayed on the face, and then it's going off all over the screen. It was focusing absolutely everywhere but on the face. Tried it a second time. Second time I think was I moved from portrait to landscape with the camera. I don't know if that makes any difference. I can't see why, but it was a bit better. But out of the 10 shots, I probably only get 4 that were in focus using 3D tracking on the 850. So that was really rather disappointing. Then the D9, and that was similar to the D780. It was no better. So Nikon's flagship, Nikon's best ever DSLR small body is actually, in my view, really no better than the D780. And for my use, the D780 for most things is better. Plus, of course, you've got face detect, an eye autofocus on the back screen. So if you're happy to shoot like that rather than like that, you can use the screen. And for portraits, that is of course absolutely fine. There's no problem at all. I don't do it very much at a wedding. I do tend to use the viewfinder, but for portraits, no problem. So the D850 has gone back, which leaves me with the question: what am I going to use for portraits? Well, we'll have to find out, and I will be doing an update, and I will be doing a video of me actually doing some portrait photography, kind of behind the scenes if I can, but also talking about gear. So one of the things that I might use, if I don't have to use flash, now I do have my rotor light. Let me just show you. Can I show you this? Yeah, well, you can't really see it, but anyway, my rotor light, Neo something or other, is the latest one, which I've used quite a lot now at weddings, and it is fabulous. It gives some lovely light. It's very adjustable. It's got a phone. I've got an app on my phone, so I can have it over the other side of the room, and I can dial the brightness up or down. I can change the colours. It's really good. It does work as a flash as well, but I haven't tended to do that because it only works as a manual flash, not as TTL. But I do love it. I've had the earlier version, but that wasn't as powerful. The battery only lasted like half an hour. This one's got a big battery, and it's really good. I can also put an umbrella on. I can either shoot it through a white umbrella or bounce it off a reflecting umbrella. And some of the shots that you're seeing on the screen behind you, some of just purely natural light, some, I can't remember, had some sort of artificial lighting. So if I'm using that rather than an off-camera flash, then I can use my Leica. And the reason I might want to use this is I've just bought another lens, a Leica 90mm f2 pre-aspherical. I think that's its full title. I do have also the Leica EVF, which makes focusing a very shallow depth of field, which obviously 90mm f2 is giving you a pretty shallow depth of field, and using the rangefinder to get focus is pretty difficult and a bit hit and miss. With the EVF or the rear screen, which is actually surprisingly good, it really is pretty damn good for manual focusing. With the focus peaking and that kind of thing, you've got a button here where we can zoom in. It's a little bit slower than a DSLR with autofocus, but this is a portrait shoot, so it's not a matter of click 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 click. It's a matter of get everything right, get the lighting right, get the pose and the look right, and then get a shot and then move on. So that 90mm may be coming into play, and that may become my main my main setup for portraits. We will have to see, and I will keep you updated on that. Meanwhile, thank you for watching. Any comments, queries, ideas, suggestions, please leave in the comments below. Thanks very much. Bye.